Miera O'Neill had been looking forward to this weekend for weeks. After months of busy schedules, work, and school, she finally had a few days to relax and enjoy herself. She had planned everything carefully, booking a luxurious hotel known for its elegance and comfort, dreaming of quiet mornings with coffee in a sunny balcony, long walks in nearby gardens, and evenings spent reading by a cozy fireplace. The thought of being surrounded by calm and beauty lifted her spirits as she approached the hotel. The building itself was stunning. Towering glass windows reflected the clear blue sky, and the entrance was framed with tall, perfectly trimmed plants. The revolving doors gleamed under the sunlight, and soft music floated out as she stepped into the lobby. Everything about the place looked inviting and sophisticated. It was the kind of hotel that promised peace, luxury, and exceptional service, exactly what Miera wanted for her short getaway. At first glance, the staff seemed polite. Front desk clerks smiled as she approached, and bellhops moved gracefully across the polished marble floors. But despite the welcoming atmosphere, Miera felt a subtle tension in the air. A man in a crisp suit watched her closely as she walked toward the check-in counter. He had an expression that was hard to read, part disapproval, part suspicion. Miera tried to ignore it. Maybe he was just doing his job. After all, she had seen hotel managers before, and they could sometimes appear serious without meaning harm. As she reached the desk, she noticed the manager more clearly. His eyes lingered on her in a way that felt uncomfortable. It wasn't just a simple glance, there was something calculating, almost judging, in his stare. Miera smiled politely, trying to be friendly, but the manager barely returned it. He spoke curtly, asking her for identification and the details of her reservation. The words themselves were normal, but the tone carried a sharpness that made her uneasy. Miera thought to herself, maybe it's just my imagination. Maybe he's just having a bad day. She handed over her ID and reservation confirmation, trying to appear calm and composed. Around her, the lobby continued its quiet hum of activity. Guests walked by, chatting softly, while the crystal chandeliers above shimmered in the sunlight. Yet, despite the beauty and luxury around her, Miera couldn't shake the feeling that she was being singled out. The manager's eyes followed her every move, and she sensed a growing tension that made the elegant surroundings feel oddly suffocating. The staff at the front desk whispered quietly among themselves, glancing occasionally at the manager. Miera noticed their uneasy expressions. She realized that something was off, but she didn't yet understand the gravity of what was about to happen. She tried to focus on the positive, the polished floors, the beautiful flowers, the sense of order and sophistication that a hotel like this usually carried. But deep down, she felt the first stirrings of worry. Something wasn't right. As the manager processed her check-in, he asked her seemingly routine questions, the purpose of her stay, how many nights she would be there, whether she had special requests. But his questions had a different edge this time, as if he was trying to catch her in some imagined mistake. Every answer she gave seemed to make him more skeptical. The warmth she had felt just minutes ago began to fade. The air that once smelled faintly of fresh flowers and polished wood now felt tense, almost heavy. Miera paused for a moment, looking around the lobby, hoping to find reassurance. Other guests were chatting happily, unaware of the silent conflict unfolding near the check-in desk. The bellhops moved efficiently, delivering luggage and greeting people, and the receptionist smiled at a couple checking in nearby. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but Miera knew better. The manager's gaze kept returning to her, sharp and penetrating. There was no welcoming smile, no polite conversation, just suspicion, and it made her skin crawl. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She reminded herself that she had done nothing wrong. She had booked this hotel legally, with every detail confirmed. She had every right to enjoy her stay. Yet, despite knowing this, a knot of anxiety had begun to form in her stomach. The tension was subtle at first, but it was growing, and Miera felt it in every small gesture the manager made, the tapping of his pen, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the way he kept leaning forward as if examining her for some flaw. It was a sharp reminder that appearances could be deceiving. On the outside, this was a beautiful hotel, a symbol of elegance and hospitality. But beneath the surface, Miera sensed a judgment she had not expected, a bias that threatened to turn what should have been a relaxing weekend into a test of patience and composure. The stage was set, and Miera, determined and resilient, knew she would need all her courage to face what was coming. As Miera O'Neill stood at the check-in counter, she tried to shake off the uneasy feeling that had been growing since she stepped into the hotel lobby. She handed over her ID and reservation confirmation, keeping her tone calm and polite. "Good afternoon, I have a reservation for the weekend," she said with a friendly smile, but the manager barely glanced at her, his eyes flicking over her information with a sharp, almost scrutinizing focus. At first, Miera thought he was just thorough. Hotels sometimes had strict policies, she reminded herself, and perhaps he was simply doing his job. But as the second stretched, she noticed something unusual. The manager's tone was not just firm, it carried a coldness, a judgment that made her stomach tighten. "I'm going to need some more details about your stay," he said, his voice clipped, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge, and Miera felt it immediately. She took a deep breath and began explaining. "I'm here for a short vacation, just a couple of days to relax," she said, hoping her words would calm the tension, but the manager didn't seem satisfied. His gaze lingered on her in a way that felt intrusive, as if he were trying to find a reason to deny her stay. Every gesture she made, every word she said, seemed to increase his suspicion rather than ease it. "What brings you here alone?" he asked abruptly, the question more probing than polite. Miera paused, surprised by the personal nature of the inquiry. "I'm here to relax and enjoy the hotel," she replied carefully, maintaining her composure, but the manager shook his head slightly, as if her answer was insufficient, unacceptable even. Around them, the staff whispered quietly to each other, their eyes flicking toward Miera as if watching a small drama unfold. The tension in the air was almost tangible, thick enough to feel like a physical weight pressing down on her. Miera noticed a couple of guests glance her way, their expressions curious but discreet. The manager's body language became more rigid, his movements sharp and deliberate. Every time she spoke, he seemed to lean in slightly, his eyes scanning her face as if searching for some flaw, some reason to question her presence. Miera's mind raced. She had experienced discrimination before, but never so directly, and certainly never in such a refined, elegant setting. This hotel, with its polished floors, sparkling chandeliers, and gentle music, should have felt safe, comfortable, even welcoming, yet here she was, standing at a counter where the man who was supposed to greet and assist her instead seemed determined to make her feel out of place. She tried again, her voice steady despite the unease creeping in. "I booked this room a week ago. My confirmation number is 56473, she said, sliding the reservation slip across the desk. The manager barely looked at it, his eyes lingering on her instead. "We may have an issue with your booking," he said, his words deliberate, vague, and unsettling. It was a statement, not an explanation, and the implication hung in the air like a shadow. For a moment, Miera considered leaving, thinking maybe a simple mistake had caused this, but she knew that would be giving in. She straightened her shoulders, refusing to let fear or uncertainty take control. "I don't understand. My reservation is confirmed. Could you please check again?" she asked, her tone polite yet firm. The manager's lips curled slightly in a dismissive expression, and his eyes hardened, as if her confidence annoyed him. "I'll need you to step aside for a moment while I verify this," he said, gesturing toward the side of the desk. The words themselves seemed harmless, but the attitude behind them felt sharp, almost hostile, and Miera could feel the tension escalating around them. She moved aside as requested but kept her phone ready, aware of the importance of documenting everything. Every movement, every word, every gesture from the manager told a story of bias, a silent but unmistakable prejudice. Miera knew she had to remain calm, to stay collected, even as a tight knot of anger and disbelief formed in her chest. By now, other guests were starting to notice the interaction, glancing toward the front desk with curiosity. The manager continued to speak in hushed tones to another staff member, glancing back at Miera occasionally. His body language screamed suspicion and judgment, and she realized that this was more than just a misunderstanding. This was a confrontation she hadn't expected. One that would soon reveal truths far beyond her weekend plans. Miera O'Neill felt the tension in the air tighten around her like a physical weight as the manager finally turned fully toward her, his face set in a hard, unyielding expression. She had been patient, polite, and calm, but it was becoming clear that none of that mattered. The manager's eyes scanned her as though trying to decide if she belonged in the hotel at all, and with a sharp, almost dismissive gesture, he delivered the words that made her heart skip a beat, "You'll need to leave. Immediately." The statement hung in the air, cold and final, and for a moment, Miera couldn't believe what she had just heard. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with disbelief. "I have a confirmed reservation." "There's no reason for me to leave." The manager didn't soften his tone. He repeated himself, his voice firmer this time. "I said, you cannot stay here. Please gather your things and leave the hotel." Shock rippled through Miera, but she refused to let panic take over. Her mind raced as she tried to understand what had gone wrong. She glanced around the lobby, noticing the curious glances of other guests, some confused, some wary, some whispered to each other, unsure of what they were witnessing, but the manager seemed oblivious to the fact that his actions were not only public but deeply wrong. The staff at the front desk shifted uncomfortably, whispering quietly among themselves, but no one stepped forward to correct the manager. It was as if they had all agreed, silently, that this confrontation was acceptable, or perhaps they were afraid of him, afraid of speaking up against his authority. Miera felt a surge of anger, mingled with disbelief, at the unfairness of the situation. She tried reasoning, her words calm but firm. "I have paid for this room, I have my confirmation. There's no reason for you to treat me this way," but the manager shook his head, his face tightening with irritation. "I don't need to explain myself further. Please leave now." His words were sharp, final, and they carried a weight that suggested he felt entirely justified. Miera's fingers tightened around her phone, ready to record if necessary. She realized this wasn't just about a misunderstanding or a mistake, it was about prejudice, a deep, unfair judgment based solely on who she was. She could feel the tension in the room rising. Every step she took toward the manager met with cold, calculated eyes, as if he wanted to intimidate her, to make her feel smaller than she was. Other guests now started to notice more clearly, their whispers growing. The hotel lobby, once a scene of elegance and calm, had transformed into a stage for humiliation. A few onlookers glanced at the manager with suspicion, sensing the unfairness, but no one intervened yet, leaving Miera to face this confrontation largely alone. She straightened her back, lifting her chin, refusing to let the humiliation break her. "I am not leaving," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the lobby. "I have a reservation, and I will be staying here." The manager's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening, as if he hadn't expected anyone to resist his authority. His hands clenched slightly at his sides, and the subtle tension in his body betrayed his frustration. The standoff lasted for what felt like an eternity, Miera's heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. She could feel the eyes of other guests, some sympathetic, some shocked, all silently observing. As she stood her ground, she realized this moment was bigger than her weekend stay. It was about standing up to injustice, about refusing to let someone's ignorance and bias define her experience. Finally, the manager took a step back, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. As though the audacity of her confidence had caught him off guard, Miera knew that the confrontation was far from over, that the real twist of this story had yet to unfold, and she braced herself for what was coming next, unaware that the revelation of her father's identity would soon change everything, turning the tables completely and exposing the truth in the most dramatic way. The tension in the hotel lobby had reached a boiling point. Miera O'Neill stood her ground, calm yet firm, as the manager's frustration grew with every passing second. He had expected fear, compliance, maybe even tears, but instead, he faced someone who refused to be intimidated. His eyes darted around the lobby, as though looking for support from the staff, but most avoided eye contact, their silence speaking volumes. The situation was awkward, uncomfortable, and increasingly tense, yet nothing could prepare him for what came next. From the corner of the lobby, a familiar voice echoed, calm but commanding. "What's going on here?" It was deep, strong, and unmistakable. The entire room seemed to pause, the soft music from the speakers fading as all attention turned toward the voice. Miera didn't even have to turn to recognize it, she felt a wave of relief mixed with satisfaction. Her father, Big Shaq, the owner of the hotel, had arrived, or at least made his presence known. The manager's face went pale almost instantly, a flicker of panic crossing his features. He had no idea who he was dealing with, no clue that the young woman he had just tried to humiliate was the daughter of the man whose name carried weight, authority, and influence across the city. The boldness that had fueled his actions only moments ago now wavered, replaced by uncertainty and fear. Big Shaq stepped forward, his eyes scanning the scene, landing on Miera. He gave a small, approving nod, a silent gesture that said more than words ever could. His daughter had handled herself with grace and courage. Then his gaze snapped to the manager, piercing and unwavering. The hotel manager, who had moments ago seemed in control, now looked like a man caught in a trap he couldn't escape. "You need to explain yourself," Big Shaq said, his voice firm but measured, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "Why are you treating my guest this way?" The manager opened his mouth, stammering, trying to form a response, but the words refused to come out clearly. His authority had vanished the second Big Shaq's name was introduced, replaced by a tangible fear. He glanced at the staff, hoping someone would intervene, but they simply watched, a mixture of relief and quiet shock on their faces. The tables had turned completely, and the manager was now fully aware of the mistake he had made. Miera stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. "I did nothing wrong. I have a confirmed reservation." "Yet, he tried to expel me from this hotel because of nothing," she said, letting the word hang in the air. It was not necessary to spell it out, everyone understood. The manager's prejudice had been on display for all to see. Big Shaq's expression hardened slightly, the warmth in his eyes replaced by the unmistakable seriousness of a man who demanded respect and fairness. "This is unacceptable," he said. "I own this hotel, and no one, no matter their position, has the right to treat a guest like this. Especially my daughter." His words carried weight, authority, and an undeniable finality. The manager's body language screamed defeat. His face flushed with embarrassment, and his hands twitched nervously at his sides. He opened his mouth, tried to speak, but the words stumbled over each other. For the first time, he understood the magnitude of his actions, not just the humiliation of Miera, but the irony that she was the daughter of the very man whose property he had so carelessly disrespected. Guests in the lobby watched silently, many nodding subtly in approval at the turn of events. The staff relaxed slightly, some exchanging relieved glances, others clearly shaken by the dramatic revelation. It was a lesson in humility, justice, and awareness, played out in real time before everyone's eyes. Miera looked at her father, a quiet gratitude shining in her eyes. She had been confident, but seeing him step in, knowing he had her back without her needing to ask, gave her a sense of relief and empowerment that was impossible to describe. The hotel, once a stage for her discomfort and humiliation, had now become a setting for justice and respect. The manager, finally regaining some composure, mumbled a weak apology, but Big Shaq held up a hand. "Save your excuses," he said, his voice calm but sharp. "You will be held accountable for this. We treat everyone here with respect, and you will remember that." With that, the atmosphere shifted entirely. The lobby no longer felt tense or threatening, it felt balanced, fair, and just. Miera's courage, combined with the unexpected revelation of her father's identity, had flipped the situation completely, turning humiliation into a powerful moment of accountability. The hotel lobby was silent, the earlier tension replaced by a heavy, expectant pause. All eyes were on the manager, who now seemed smaller, deflated, and completely unprepared for the confrontation that was about to unfold. Big Shaq's presence had shifted the power balance instantly. Where there had been arrogance and prejudice, there was now a quiet but commanding authority that the manager could not ignore. Miera stood beside her father, calm, composed, and more determined than ever. Big Shaq took a slow step toward the manager, his eyes locked on the man who had caused such unnecessary humiliation. "I want a full explanation," he said, his voice steady but firm, reverberating through the lobby. "Tell me why you thought it was acceptable to treat a guest this way, especially someone who has a confirmed reservation." The manager swallowed hard, his throat dry. He opened his mouth, trying to find words, but nothing came out. His confidence from moments ago had evaporated completely, leaving only guilt, embarrassment, and a creeping realization that he had underestimated the situation in every way. The staff at the desk exchanged uneasy glances, silently urging him to speak, but even they seemed unsure if he could recover. Miera stepped forward, her eyes calm but piercing. "You didn't just make a mistake," she said softly, yet every word cut through the air like a knife. "You made a choice. A choice to judge me unfairly, to assume things about me based on nothing but your bias. You humiliated me in front of other guests. You acted without reason or authority. And now, it's time for accountability." The manager's hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. He glanced nervously around the lobby, noticing the stares of other guests, the subtle nods of agreement, and the silent tension that made the room feel like a courtroom. This was no longer a private matter, the entire hotel had witnessed his behavior. For the first time, he realized that prejudice and arrogance carried consequences, especially when exposed. Big Shaq continued, his voice unwavering. "We have standards here. Standards of respect, fairness, and professionalism. And anyone who cannot uphold them will face consequences. I own this hotel. And in my hotel, no one is above the rules. Do you understand?" The question was simple, but it carried an undeniable weight, and the manager could only nod, unable to meet the stern gaze of the hotel owner. Miera took a deep breath, feeling the power of the moment. "It's not just about me," she said. "It's about every person who walks through these doors. People come here expecting respect, safety, and professionalism. And your behavior violated all of that. It's time for you to own your actions and reflect on why you thought this behavior was acceptable in the first place." The manager's face reddened, a mixture of shame and regret flooding his expression. For the first time, he realized the real impact of his actions, not just on Miera, but on the reputation of the hotel, the staff who had witnessed it, and the guests who had been uncomfortable watching the scene unfold. He could no longer hide behind authority, excuses, or arrogance. The confrontation had stripped him bare, leaving only the stark truth of his misconduct. Big Shaq took a step closer, his tone sharp but not cruel. "You will issue a formal apology to my daughter. You will also undergo sensitivity training to understand how your behavior affects others. This is non-negotiable. We are setting an example here, for you, for the staff, and for everyone who works in this industry." The manager nodded quickly, swallowing nervously. I understand," he said, his voice shaky. "I apologize. I was wrong. It won't happen again." Miera looked at him steadily, her voice calm but firm. "Words are easy. Actions matter. You need to show that you understand the harm you caused and ensure it never happens again. Respect isn't optional. It's expected." The tension in the lobby slowly began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of relief. Guests relaxed, staff straightened up, and the manager finally lowered his gaze, the weight of accountability pressing down on him in a way he had never experienced before. This was not humiliation, it was justice. This was a lesson in respect, awareness, and the power of standing up against injustice. As Miera and Big Shaq walked toward the elevator, the manager quietly returned to his desk, humbled and thoughtful, already reflecting on how he had failed, not just as a professional, but as a human being entrusted with the responsibility of treating everyone fairly. The confrontation had ended, but the lesson would remain, leaving an indelible mark on the hotel, its staff, and the guests who had witnessed the moment justice was served. The story didn't end in the hotel lobby. As soon as the confrontation was over, whispers began to ripple through the building, subtle at first but quickly spreading like wildfire. Guests who had witnessed the entire ordeal shared their experiences with each other, their voices low but filled with disbelief. Phones appeared in hands everywhere, some capturing videos, others snapping discreet photos. The tension and drama had created a scene impossible to ignore, and the details were too shocking to be kept private. Social media, as it always does in moments like these, became the next stage for the story. A video of the manager trying to expel Miera, paired with clips of Big Shaq calmly stepping in, began circulating almost immediately. Within minutes, the footage had reached hundreds, and within hours, it had gone viral. Comments flooded in from all over, many expressing outrage at the manager's prejudice, admiration for Miera's courage, and respect for Big Shaq's calm, authoritative intervention. News outlets quickly picked up the story. Local news anchors discussed the incident on live television, calling it a shocking confrontation in a luxury hotel, and highlighting the remarkable moment when the hotel owner revealed his connection to Miera. The story resonated with audiences far beyond the city, sparking conversations about discrimination, workplace behavior, and the importance of standing up for oneself in moments of injustice. Meanwhile, inside the hotel, the staff were quietly buzzing with reaction. Some admitted they had been uncomfortable watching the manager's behavior but felt powerless to intervene. Others were relieved that the situation had been addressed, recognizing the lesson in respect and professionalism that had just unfolded before them. It was clear to everyone that this event would change the atmosphere in the hotel forever. Staff members whispered about how they had witnessed a public example of what happens when prejudice goes unchecked, and the consequences that follow. The guests who had watched the scene unfold in person shared their own posts online, adding personal perspectives and observations. "I've never seen anything like this in a hotel," one wrote. "The way the manager treated her was unbelievable, but Big Shaq handled it perfectly. She didn't back down, and he didn't either." Another commented, "This is a lesson for everyone, never underestimate people or judge them unfairly. Karma has a way of showing up." The story also sparked larger discussions online about systemic bias in the hospitality industry. Influencers and activists used the viral footage as an example of why vigilance and accountability are so important. Hashtags began trending, such as hashtag justice served, hashtag stand up to discrimination, hashtag Big Shaq, and hashtag Miera O'Neil, each post amplifying the reach of the story and ensuring that the lessons from this single incident would reach countless viewers around the world. Amid the viral spread, Miera herself felt a mixture of relief and pride. She had been calm in the moment, but seeing the public reaction reinforced the importance of standing up for herself. People from around the world were praising her courage, validating her actions, and calling for accountability in all industries, not just hotels. It was an unexpected but empowering aftermath, showing her that her composure and bravery had made a real impact far beyond her personal experience. Big Shaq, for his part, used the attention to send a clear message: discrimination would not be tolerated, and respect was mandatory. His calm handling of the situation, combined with the viral reach of the story, turned the incident into a teaching moment for others, both inside the hotel and online. What had started as a tense, private confrontation became a public example of justice, courage, and the importance of standing up to unfair treatment. The hotel itself soon became known not just for its luxury but for the story that had unfolded within its walls. Guests and social media users alike referenced the incident, praising the way it was handled and noting the immediate accountability enforced by Big Shaq. The manager's actions had backfired, leaving a lasting mark on his reputation, while Miera's dignity and courage became an inspiring example for millions. In the end, the public reaction wasn't just about witnessing a conflict. It was about recognizing fairness, respect, and justice. The story spread far and wide, a reminder that standing up for oneself, supported by integrity and authority, can have consequences that ripple well beyond a single room, well beyond a single hotel, and well beyond a single viral moment. The hotel lobby had returned to a quieter rhythm, but the impact of the earlier confrontation lingered in the air like an electric charge. Miera O'Neil stood beside her father, Big Shaq, feeling a strange mix of relief, empowerment, and satisfaction. The ordeal had been exhausting, emotionally draining, and incredibly stressful, yet somehow, it had transformed into something far more powerful, a story of accountability, courage, and justice that would resonate far beyond the hotel walls. The manager, once so confident and domineering, now approached the front desk with a humbled demeanor. His earlier arrogance had vanished, replaced with visible embarrassment and a tentative sense of awareness. Big Shaq watched him carefully, his expression calm but unwavering. "You have a responsibility here," he said, his voice quiet yet commanding. "Not just to the guests, but to the staff and the reputation of this hotel. Mistreatment like what happened today cannot be ignored." The manager nodded, swallowing hard. He understood that this wasn't just about an apology or a single incident, it was about demonstrating genuine accountability. "I understand," he said quietly. I will apologize to Ms. O'Neill, and I will attend the training sessions you mentioned. I want to do better. I see now that I was completely wrong." Miera gave him a measured look, her composure unwavering. "It's not enough to say the words," she replied. "You need to show through your actions that you understand the harm you caused. People watch, and respect isn't optional, it's mandatory." The manager nodded again, his posture finally straightening, signaling the beginning of a change. Big Shaq turned to the staff at the front desk. "I want everyone to take this as a lesson," he said. "We run this hotel with integrity, professionalism, and respect. If anyone treats our guests unfairly, there will be consequences. That's the standard here, and it applies to everyone, no exceptions." The staff members exchanged glances, many nodding quietly, grateful for the clarity and the lesson they had all witnessed firsthand. For Miera, the resolution of the conflict was more than just about the hotel. It was about reclaiming her dignity, proving her strength, and knowing that standing firm against injustice had real consequences. The public reaction had already begun to echo online, but now, inside the hotel, she could see the tangible effects. Staff members who had previously whispered nervously among themselves now moved with renewed confidence, and guests who had been unsettled by the earlier confrontation were reassured by the visible accountability and fairness. Big Shaq guided Miera toward the elevators, his arm around her shoulder, a gesture of pride and protection. "You handled yourself perfectly," he said quietly, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Not everyone has the courage to stay calm in a situation like that, and you did it with dignity. I'm proud of you." Miera smiled, feeling the weight of the stressful morning lift off her shoulders. The tension that had consumed her earlier was replaced with a sense of empowerment and satisfaction. In the following hours, the manager issued a formal apology to Miera, both in private and publicly within the hotel. He also began sensitivity training, as Big Shaq had insisted, taking steps to ensure that his future behavior aligned with the standards of respect and professionalism expected at the property. Staff members who had witnessed the incident were encouraged to provide feedback, share their experiences, and participate in discussions about workplace conduct and equality. By the end of the day, the hotel had transformed from a place of tension and discomfort into a symbol of accountability, fairness, and respect. Guests returned to their activities, staff resumed their duties with renewed attention to professionalism, and Miera finally allowed herself to relax. The conflict had not only been resolved but had also left a lasting impact, reinforcing lessons that would shape the culture of the hotel for years to come. As she settled into her room, Miera reflected on the events of the day. What had started as an ordinary weekend getaway had turned into an extraordinary experience, a personal test of courage, a lesson in resilience, and a demonstration of how injustice can be confronted and corrected when people stand up for what is right. She knew the story would continue to spread, both online and offline, inspiring others to speak out, stay calm, and demand accountability in the face of prejudice. By nightfall, the hotel felt different. The energy in the lobby, the way staff moved about their duties, and even the way guests interacted all seemed subtly transformed. The message was clear: respect and fairness were non-negotiable. Miera had won far more than the right to stay in her room. She had helped create a culture of accountability, dignity, and empowerment that would resonate long after the weekend was over. By the time evening settled over the hotel, the events of the day had left a lasting mark, not just on the staff or the guests, but on everyone who had witnessed what had unfolded. Miera O'Neill sat in the quiet comfort of her room, the soft glow of the city lights outside the window reflecting off the walls. Her heart had finally slowed, but her mind was still buzzing with thoughts. What had started as an ordinary weekend getaway had transformed into a story of courage, accountability, and unexpected justice. She reflected on the confrontation in the lobby, replaying the tense moments in her mind. The manager's sharp words, the stares of the guests, the subtle whispers of the staff, all of it had been overwhelming. And yet, she realized that those moments had revealed her own strength in ways she hadn't fully appreciated before. She had stayed calm, composed, and assertive, even when faced with blatant prejudice. And when her father, Big Shaq, intervened, it had amplified the lesson in an unforgettable way. But beyond the drama, what mattered most was how she had handled herself with dignity, proving that courage wasn't about confrontation alone, it was about composure, clarity, and knowing your worth. The public reaction had been immediate and overwhelming. Videos and photos of the incident had gone viral, shared across social media platforms, sparking widespread discussions about discrimination, professionalism, and respect. Millions had watched the unfolding story, and countless more had engaged in conversations about accountability in workplaces, particularly in the hospitality industry. Miera realized that her personal experience had unintentionally become a symbol for standing up against unfair treatment. Her calm resilience, combined with Big Shaq's decisive intervention, had inspired others to confront injustice in their own lives. Inside the hotel, the impact was equally profound. The manager, who had once carried himself with arrogance and bias, was now visibly changed. He apologized publicly, participated in sensitivity training, and began reflecting on how his actions affected others. The staff, who had quietly observed the ordeal, found themselves encouraged to hold each other accountable, to treat every guest with fairness, and to create an environment that reflected dignity and respect. The hotel had shifted, not just physically, but culturally, into a place where behavior was guided by principle, not prejudice. For Miera, the experience was empowering, but it was also humbling. She had been tested in ways she never anticipated, forced to navigate fear, discomfort, and public scrutiny. And yet, she realized that the most important part of the story was not the confrontation itself, but the larger lessons it carried. Courage matters, standing up for what is right can create ripple effects, and injustice, when confronted, can lead to meaningful change. She thought about other people who might face similar challenges, and she felt a sense of responsibility, a quiet determination to continue advocating for fairness and respect in her own way. Big Shaq, too, recognized the broader impact. What could have been a private family matter had become a public lesson, demonstrating the importance of leadership, accountability, and integrity. By intervening calmly but firmly, he had ensured that the hotel's standards were upheld while also setting an example for countless viewers online. His actions underscored the idea that power comes with responsibility, and that true authority is exercised not through intimidation, but through fairness and principle. As Miera looked out over the city lights, she thought about the ripple effects of that day. The story had reached far beyond the hotel lobby, inspiring conversations in households, offices, and online communities. People were sharing their own experiences of standing up to injustice, encouraging others to do the same, and reflecting on how accountability can change lives. What had begun as a personal confrontation had grown into a universal lesson about respect, dignity, and the courage to act when faced with wrongdoing. In the end, the hotel became more than a place to stay, it became a symbol. A symbol that prejudice could be confronted, that injustice could be corrected, and that courage, no matter how quietly expressed, could spark change. Miera knew that this story would stay with her forever, a reminder of her own strength and the power of standing up for what is right. It was a lesson she would carry forward, sharing not only with those close to her but with anyone who might face similar challenges. The impact of that day was undeniable. A hotel incident had turned into a powerful social lesson, a viral story that inspired millions, and a personal journey that had forever changed Miera, the staff, and even the manager who had once underestimated her. Justice had been served, courage had been rewarded, and the world, in its own small way, had witnessed the profound effect of standing firm, speaking up, and demanding respect.